which therefore provides harm to AOC and those trying to find more effective ways to mitigate this sort of HIV and AIDS, which, whereas their dialogue in that isn't necessarily saying that they are pro-prostitution, it's just limiting them from looking at other options.
Is it clear that this law actually prohibited the organization from taking a pro-prostitution stance?
The Leadership Act?
Yeah.
I think it explicitly said that they cannot.
Well, they must have an explicit
Yes.
anti-prostitution policy. But to what extent did the law gag an organization from saying things about that subject matter?
I just read in certain arguments that they because this law was vague, they felt uncertain and uncomfortable entering this and writing this.
Being uncomfortable makes the law unconstitutional? Emil?
It's kind of going off that, but one of the justices actually mentioned that one of the problems would be that they become another arm of their organization, that like with technically the same organization that's another different charter and everything, that didn't have to have the same explicit, and they could use part of that did have the explicit in the Constitution to get money, but then use the money from another arm. So that is like get around it.
So they could do an end run around the law and still preserve their speech rights by setting up a separate entity. So, Julia?
But the problem with that was some of the justices found that because it was foreign, like overseas, that it's really hard to create a separate organization just to go play like European. So I think it was like so my argument kind of like it was really, really hard to create again a separate entity to support like your second arm overseas.
Mm-hmm. What was the Obama administration's position in this case? They defended the law in the Supreme Court, right? Didn't they do a flip-flop? That's what I'm saying? They had some proposal for a rule that would allow the organizations to speak about prostitution without getting defunded. I thought that they had done something like that. Maybe that was...
I think the point is that they didn't create the because the USA adopted a policy, they clarified the provision and said that, because after it was ruled in the circuit, they said, well, actually you can create an organization, an independent one that has separate personnel, facilities, accounting records, whatever. The one who sells the engine receive funding, the ability to use private funds, and they can adopt whatever policy they want to, so long as the receiving funds only has an anti-prostitution policy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was
For those of you who found the law unconstitutional, were there any particular precedents, previously decided cases of the court, that you thought were particularly influential in coming to your conclusion? No?
In those, they aren't talking about a certain issue or topic or a way of expressing opinion. In this case, they forced a position on it. That wasn't in really direct effect of preventing the spread of HIV and AIDS.
Mm-hmm. For those who haven't done this, tell them what Rusk was about. It was a abortion counseling case where the feds decided that they didn't want to fund abortion counseling and prohibited, therefore, doctors from counseling about abortion. I don't see how, and the court upheld that restriction, right? How does that help decide that the law, in this case, is unconstitutional? Seems like it goes the other direction.
They outline speaking about abortion. In this case, they're not outlining speaking about prostitution. They're forcing a certain position on prostitution, which isn't directly, it's not aligned with the organization's aims.
Yeah, what's forbidden is a particular viewpoint on the subject, not just talking about it, but the viewpoint that the government disfavors. Okay?
That was the distinction with it, that the organizations they were talking about were government owned and regulated versus partnerships that were being talked about with organizations that were giving leaders a lot of rights.
Mm-hmm.
Which in my mind is a big distinction. You're not talking about government entity, now you're talking about a private enterprise.
Surely, if it's the government can decide not to speak or only to speak on a certain from a certain viewpoint.
Right, but you can't come out here and say you need to speak like you're not going to get it. Type of thing. To a non-government organization. To an organization that's not the government.
Were the Jehovah's Witnesses cases in play here? Remember the Pledge of Allegiance case where the court says you can't force people to state a belief that you don't hold? Or the license plate case where people are required to carry a message with which they disagree? Were those cases involved in your analysis, mainly? No. No? Why not? Gee, sounds good to me. The government can't coerce the profession a statement of belief that you don't have.
The government, forcing anyone to do it, it was just if you wanted this federal funding. So it was more of a requirement of funding, so it was different than something that was not really voluntary.
Well, if the government can impose speech conditions on whoever it subsidizes, there's no limit to that, is there? I mean, doesn't that mean that this law in particular is constitutional? And any law where the government says, I'll give you money, provided that you don't say this or that you must say that. I mean, that's the American Library Association case that we looked at Tuesday. That's what the rationale of the court was. You don't have to take our money if you don't want, but if you do, you're going to toe the government line. So viewpoint is at the heart of the controversy. Okay. I looked last night at the Freedom House rankings of freedom of the press around the world. Freedom House is a nonprofit organization based in New York, been around since Eleanor Roosevelt set it up, that pays attention to human rights issues around the world, notably including freedom of speech and democratic freedom. And every year they do a survey of 197 countries in the world on freedom of the press. And they rank all of the countries in the world according to criteria that they use about freedom of the press. And I'm sorry to say that this year, as in prior years, the United States of America ranks not number one in the world in freedom of the press, or two, or anywhere near that. We are tied for 23rd 23rd, which is an improvement from 2012 when we were 24th. The ratings were just published yesterday, May 1st. And as usual, the countries that dominate the top of the list, the freest press in the world, are almost all Scandinavian countries. Belgium has crept into the top of the mix, as tied for third now. Norway and Sweden are in first. The Netherlands is tied for third. Finland's up there, then comes Denmark and so on. But we at 23rd are tied with Barbados, Costa Rica, and Jamaica. You wouldn't think of them as having particularly free press, but that's where we are. We come in behind Portugal, behind Germany, behind Ireland, behind Estonia, former Soviet republic in the Soviet Union. And it's pretty sobering that we rank so low when we go around congratulating ourselves about how free we are. Why are we ranked so low? Well, the full country reports haven't been published yet for Freedom House, but what they said in the past, and there's a little squib about this in the introductory essay to the ratings yesterday, is that in this country, as compared to others, the newspaper industry is in very bad shape. Newspapers disappearing, going under. Newspaper readership is extremely low in this country, compared, for example, to the Scandinavian countries, where the average person reads 2 newspapers a day. Combined with that is the concentration of ownership of the American media, but that's not unique. It's pretty concentrated in most countries. A second factor that Freedom House has identified, and that we've identified here, is the lack of protection for reporters' confidential sources. Recall the Earl Caldwell case called Brandsburg, where the court decided that there is no First Amendment protection for reporters against being subpoenaed to go into a grand jury and disclose their confidential sources or information obtained in confidence from a source, from a whistleblower, for example. Well, we don't have First Amendment protection here. In many other countries, including, for example, Sweden, which I happen to know about, the protection for reporters' confidential sources is enshrined in their constitution, written into their constitution, whereas we don't have any protection other than what state laws have provided for reporters, but there's no federal protection for whistleblowers, which makes whistleblowing an especially hazardous occupation. You don't want to risk losing your job or your life by being identified, so you don't tell a reporter what people ought to know. And the net effect of that is the American people, us, don't get to know information that might importantly affect us. And then this year, the Freedom House report also identifies that during 2012, there was a limited willingness of high-level government officials to provide access and information to members of the press. That was noted as a concern. And the access problem is one that we looked at with the KQED, the Houchin versus KQED case. There's no First Amendment right of access to government information. All we get is what government allows us to know. We don't have a right to know what our government is up to. That's constitutionally based. Yes, we have a Freedom of Information Act that Congress has enacted, which is certainly important and certainly helpful. It's in the Constitution in Sweden and other countries. Here we have a piece of legislation that gives us the right to ask the government to look at certain records. But only those records. You don't get to ask questions. You don't get to go inside and look around. And there are major exemptions in the Freedom of Information Act, for example, national security and ongoing criminal investigations. And a lot of the information that we would like to know is exempted from disclosure by the Freedom of Information Act. So without a right of access to government information, we are weaker in terms of our freedoms than many other developed democracies. I would add to the list, that Freedom House didn't mention this, they haven't passed, I would add to the list the FCC's ridiculous indecency policy, which muzzles the broadcasters to some extent. Nicole? How did what?
How does the success of the newspaper industry go along with the free press?
They look at the viability, the economic viability of the press. Can the press do its job in this democracy by reporting information that people need to know? And to the extent that newspapers are going under, Freedom House says, well, the newspaper business is not doing the job that it ought to be doing in a democracy. You're not convinced?
I mean, just like the reason why is especially because we don't have government funding to protect the more free press than others. So.
That's true. We don't have. I suppose one could question whether government funding of newspapers would make us make the press freer than it is. I would be reluctant to say that getting government money creates greater freedom. Okay. Well, anyway, I'm done. I hope I've given you some appreciation for freedom of speech in the press and how important these values are and how fragile they are, because the government and the people is forever going to be trying to chip away at them and to restrict them and to protect this competing value and that competing value and so on. And your job is to resist that. And more importantly, I hope that you will go out and live your lives in such a way as to deserve those freedoms. So I'll see those of you who want to show up on Tuesday for the review session and the rest of you at the final. Don't forget to do your course evaluations and hand them in to Kimberly. That's extra credit? You get it? I don't think I retreated. You're Brian, right? Yeah, you better look at this.